I mean, I think sometimes it's just crazy the things that we get called to. I had a lady got her finger caught in an umbrella.
I'm assuming that was an easy fix.
Please call for help. We need a paramedic on the scene now.
Hello, everybody. It's time for some more Law Lite. Law Lite is brought to you by Foreman Watson Holtry, FWHlegal.com. We are located at 530 Frederica Street, and we are podcasting to America from 530, from the high-rise White Tower. All right, it's a Monday. Or actually, it's a Friday by the time you listen to this. But
right,
anyway,
but it's still a Monday.
It is a Monday. Hey, PJ, don't want to waste time because we've got a special guest today.
We do.
And I want to thank you just, right off the top for having the idea and then making it happen.
Thank you.
We have Dinah Chapman with us. Dinah, are you there?
Morning.
Good morning. And we're doing this, of course, we are still social distancing. And so Dinah's joining us by phone, and that's great. Technology is wonderful. But PJ, you I guess you were explaining to me that Dinah is a paramedic supervisor for our local ambulance service here in Owensboro, but other things too. She's the deputy coroner, and she also teaches the paramedic program at OCTC. Is that right?
Correct.
Is that right,
Yes,
Dinah? Yeah. Okay, great. Now, what I'm wondering is how could somebody so accomplished, PJ, be a part of your circle? I mean, how can somebody with all of these qualifications be like, somebody you can hook us up with? How'd that work?
About 5 years ago, I was making volumes of blood, and there's an aftermath scene in the movie that requires some police and ambulances. And that's how I got connected with Dinah. Was it through Brad Youngman?
Yes.
Yeah, so he got us in touch, and Brad was with Owensboro Police Department at the time. He's with the Sheriff's Department now. We got connected, and we hit it off, and we've been friends ever since.
Well,
so
that's great. That's great. Dinah, I always am bugging PJ and saying, well, when do I get an appearance on one of your shows, on one of your movies? It seems to me like you should get a cameo appearance if you're providing ambulances and all of this to make his show. I mean, don't you think we need to kind of work together at least to get one of us on one of his movies?
I did. I got my 5 seconds of fame on the first volumes of Blood. So,
oh, you did? Did he at
yes.
least, did he give you a face shot, or was it from the back of the head? Because to me, he told me that, he may use like my arm or something like that.
It was like a side shot. So, I got like some of me in there. So it worked.
Dinah, of course, Foreman Watson Holtry, we do a lot of personal injury work, and a good volume of our work comes from automobile wrecks, collisions that occur on the roadways here in western Kentucky. And I thought it would be interesting to hear from your perspective some things that, because by the time somebody comes to us, we're learning about the matter through the records that paramedics keep, the emergency room records, and then, of course, subsequent treatment. But I thought it would be interesting to kind of hear the perspective of, somebody that works in the emergency medical services field. But then, of course, I do have some questions I want to talk to you about from, the perspective of being the deputy coroner. Would you say now, prior to COVID-19, of course, automobile collisions and wrecks were at an all-time high as far as your volume from your perspective?
Yeah, that's something we see every day, sometimes multiple days. Obviously, weather has a factor in that. When it gets nice and sunny, more people are out, and that tends to kind of ramp up the volume a little bit.
One of the things that amazes me is weather does affect it, and a lot of people think, well, there's more wrecks when it rains or more wrecks when it snows, but what you just said is what we're noticing during COVID-19 is the phones have basically stopped ringing for car wrecks because people haven't been out and driving. But when that weather gets nice and you don't have a pandemic, the volume of wrecks does go up, doesn't it?
Yeah, most people, I'm sure you've experienced yourself, windows down, a favorite song on the radio, and the next thing you know, you look down and you're doing like 10 over the speed limit.
Right.
And it tends to kind of keep us keeps your focus on something else and not the road.
You probably are so focused on addressing the medical concerns of the occupants in a vehicle, but when you get to a wreck, what do you think is the more common cause? You think it's driving under the influence, or do you think it's cell phone usage, or speeding, or what are you seeing out there from your experience?
Probably a little bit more between, it's kind of a tie between, intoxication and cell phone use.
Yeah.
People are just not paying attention.
I want to also talk to you about the severity of injuries. When I first started practicing law, very few cars had airbags, okay? And then airbags became something in first it was driver's side, then it became all around. Now we have the curtain airbags. From your perspective, the vehicles where those airbags and seatbelts are used, are the injuries definitely kept more in check?
Yeah, those things come out of everywhere now these days. We have to actually, once the airbags are deployed and then they deflate, we're having to cut the airbags away just to get to the patient. So. Yeah. It does keep down on, especially a lot of side impact injuries. Now, we do see some injuries from the airbags themselves. They come out pretty fast. But most of the time, those are just like, first degree burns on the skin, no more than a sunburn.
Right.
But they do help protect from the initial impact.
I know while they were perfecting the airbag technology, I went to a couple seminars where people would be driving with their thumbs over the airbag, and it would dislocate or break their thumbs. And if they had their arm like across their steering wheel and the airbag would go off, it would break their wrist and stuff. But I think they've gotten a lot better. But still, it's interesting that one of the very first things you're worrying is cutting away airbags and things like that to get to the people.
Yeah, our first priority obviously is to get to the patient, but our number one priority for anyone who responds, whether it be police, fire, or EMS, is personal safety. And I know sometimes that seems a little redundant, but we're trying not to get ourselves hurt in trying to get to the patient, because then we've just created more patients.
And that was what I was getting ready to ask you, is sometimes you are in quite precarious positions trying to get to where you can care for the patient.
Yeah, a lot of times, we have to stay back, let the, especially if there's a fire or something like that, electrical lines down. There's a lot of things that would hinder us from getting to the patient immediately in order to protect our own safety. About
how many ambulances do we have that service the Owensboro, Davis County area?
It depends on the time of day, but at our peak hours, we have 8.
And have we ever had, in your experience, how long have you been doing this in the Owensboro area?
I'm just 2 months shy of 16 years.
Oh, wow. Have we ever had some type of situation, a storm or, a massive pileup, I don't know, but where all 8 ambulances had to be deployed at the same time?
Not in recent years. We have had issues where we've had to call in other counties to help out. Like the tornado that hit, that kept us really busy. Mm-hmm. There's been several, and most of the time they're more mass casualty incidents like that, not just a car wreck.
Right.
We do pretty good at providing, a lot in one ambulance. We can take multiple patients in one ambulance, depending on the severity of the injuries.
Yeah, I know we've had wrecks before where, father, daughter, husband, wife are in the same ambulance, transported away from a wreck site to the. We've even had the interesting one. Remember, PJ, where we had the person that caused the wreck and our client who had not caused the wreck in the same ambulance,
Yeah.
and our client remembered hearing things that she was saying.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we've had a couple of those actually where people have been in the same
that's
ambulance.
common practice
Yeah.
in any ambulance service, especially the more rural that you get, just because you're looking at time frames. Is it going to take longer to get a second ambulance in a scene? Rather than just packaging both patients and heading to the hospital.
The one thing I'm surprised about now, you know me, I'm a hypochondriac, and I'm always Mr. Worst Case Scenario. But I have to admit, it surprises me, and it does make me feel better to know that in an area such as ours, where we've got 60,000 plus people, only 8 ambulances is enough. The way my mind works, I'm thinking there's people getting stabbed and shot and heart attacks and car
It's
wrecks.
because you
and
produce horror movies, PJ.
Right. I think maybe that's after watching so many movies, I just automatically assume that there's something constantly happening, so you would need a lot of ambulances consistently. But the fact that it's only 8 and that's enough that actually makes me feel pretty good.
I know it seems like a low number, considering we service Owensboro and Davis County. You're looking over 100,000 people, but we get it done, obviously. But, the run volume, we try to keep the most ambulances at peak hours.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to look at cost and things like that.
Right.
Of course, that's above my pay grade.
Right.
But we make it work. As long as I've been on, we've always had about 8 ambulances during the day. Of course, years ago, it was less than that. Run volume has increased in the last, I'd say, 5 to 6 years, causing to staff more ambulances on than we used to have.
I've got all kinds of questions I want to ask you. First thing I want to ask is, PJ works with us in producing videos for our clients. So we take kind of from the very beginning, we reconstruct the wreck, then we come through and we show all of their different treatment, and we do show, ambulance run records in those, and different vitals that are complaints and treatments that are already administered through the EMS service. But, we've recently been able to tap into our police officers are wearing videos, and they have videos in their car. Are we to the point where EMSs are videotaping either their path of travel or inside the ambulance or anything like that happening?
We do have some of those options available for us now.
Mm-hmm.
I think as far as body cameras go, I don't know if we'll see that in this region. I know a lot of the bigger inner cities, some of them carry, a personal camera or a body camera, but I don't think that's something we may not see here for several years.
Right. Well, it's not. I think eventually it would be very important for you guys to have that. But obviously with police officers, a lot of times it's because of the criminal aspect of what they're dealing with. They want to have video proof of what how they're handling the either the victim or the accused, and all that kind of thing, and traffic stops. So I can see why that's a priority, but I can also think of, for legal reasons, why it would be important for paramedics to have those.
Of course, dispatch is the first line of first responding. So if they feel that there's something that warrants police officers to go with us, they're right there. Like we have a great relationship with local fire and police. They're always extra hands on scene. And so we kind of like all one dysfunctional family. We work really well together.
A while back, Dinah, I had a case where a gentleman had heart attack symptom and was picked up at his house by EMTs. And before they left his house, they had already done an EKG and sent the report from the EKG to the hospital. And now that really amazes me. Like the hospital can be waiting for this patient and already have their EKG, and those are things people don't think of, but the communication between you and coming into the hospital and preparing the hospital is a major thing, isn't it?
I think in general, a lot of people don't understand what we do. They go by shows that they've seen or movies that they've watched, but people don't understand the education that goes behind becoming an EMT or a paramedic. There's so many things that we can do in the back of that ambulance that people are not aware of, that we can start some very crucial care, medications, before even getting en route to the hospital, and then notifying the hospital exactly what we're bringing in so they can get whatever teams together they need, whether it be the stroke team, the cath lab for someone who's having a heart attack. There's a lot of respiratory for someone who's not breathing or, close need to being intubated.
Mm-hmm.
We have a good relationship with the hospital, and, we can do a lot of things in the field in the back of the ambulance, and then we can notify the hospital, letting them know what we're bringing to them. That way they can get those things together, whether it be a trauma patient, where they can get the blood bank, or the cath lab for someone who's having a heart attack. So, and for us, having that relationship with them just betters the patient.
Right. And the communication of that's just incredible. I have a case I'm currently working on a couple counties over where a patient had overdosed on opioids it's narcotics. EMS got there and immediately administered Narcan, and I'm convinced that was a life-saving, and to be in those situations where life is in the balance, it's got to be a calling.
So people who, come to your house, we do it for the patient. We not only do it for, we don't do it for us. We do it for them. This isn't something that we get into for the money or for the praise or the glory. Most of us who do this, it's in our blood. We do this because it's, helping that person on their worst day of their life.
Right. When I personally am appreciative. Just recently had a situation when I was eating with my father at Colby's, and he got dizzy, and he went unresponsive. And what was amazing is as an attorney, I like to. In fact, it's like our entire motto here is your problem is my passion, and I'm a kind of a problem solver, a fixer. But when it was a medical need and my dad was basically laying in my arms, I was helpless until the people that knew what to do got there, and so I'm personally appreciative of it, but I'm amazed at just how you guys deal with that on a daily basis.
We're there for the family as well. Most of the time when people call, it's the worst day of their life, but that also goes for the family,
right?
Being able to, or being there watching their family member go through something and they're helpless and all they can do is just stand and wait till we get there. A lot of times it's also taking care of the family, emotionally, letting them know, yes, we're here. We're going to take care of them. We're going to do everything we can and get their loved one to the hospital safely and hopefully in better condition than when we took off.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to switch up a little bit here. I'm going to ask PJ a question, and then it's going to get back to you, Dinah. PJ, have you ever ridden as a patient in an ambulance?
Yes, actually. It's the wreck that ultimately brought me here.
Right.
I was sandwiched between two cars. Paramedics were there. It seemed like seconds. Like it took no time for them to get there, and they came right over to me. I was on the phone. It was weird because I don't even remember acting like I was in pain or anything, but they came right over to me and were asking me all these questions. And then, of course, I told them that I was having kind of a minor pain in the small of my back, and they immediately went into, okay, get the stretcher. They put a collar on me. They brought me, they carried me over and put me on the backboard, and it was different. That was the first time I've ever ridden in an ambulance. I've dealt with paramedics before, been in situations where paramedics were around, but that was the first time I've ever had an ambulance ride. But they were super attentive and constantly asking questions and it was, they were on it.
Yeah. Well, the reason I asked you that is that, I've one time I was playing basketball and I got flipped upside down and knocked myself totally I hit my head on the floor.
Oh, yikes.
And I woke up with EMTs around me, and so we rode to the hospital. But I remember that was my only experience, and it was it seemed noisy in there because things are shaking, because they have so many, and people are on top of me, and I was riding backwards, and I almost started getting nauseated. And it could have been because I took a knock on the head too, but I remember it was frightening to me. I not that I'm not trying to sound like a big sissy here, but it just seemed frightening. It was like I was enclosed and there was bright lights, and it was
right.
But you and I have asked that question to hundreds of people, haven't we, PJ?
Oh,
about
absolutely.
What was the ambulance ride like for you? And some people, it's just really it wasn't that big of a deal. And especially we've had little kids, you would think it would be frightening to little kids, and little kids are well,
they think it's fun.
It's but it's just a whole. And what's funny is that I remember thinking. I knew I was at the gym where I was playing, and I was trying to think of where I was the whole time while we were driving,
Right.
But it seemed like we got to the hospital too quick.
It's funny you say that because my experience was different because I got hit over on Parrish by where the gas station is, and it felt like it took forever to get to the hospital.
Really?
Yeah. And then I will say I didn't have a negative experience, but I remember when I was strapped down and I was on the gurney, I felt like I was kind of at a weird angle, and I kept feeling like I was going to slide backwards off the gurney for some reason.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was I mean, it was a positive experience, but it did feel like it took, but I think it's because I was in a collar, and those
Right.
collars
Yeah.
suck.
That's all typical. We hear that all the time. All of those responses you just said, like, and it is. I mean, and that's what, that's a lot of part of the education that we go through. Like I referred to earlier, there's so much education that goes into being a paramedic or an EMT, and I just think people don't understand it. We didn't get a license and then just start doing this job. There's so much that goes into it,
Right.
especially, me working on the teaching side of things. We understand that. You're strapped down to a board. You can't move. The collar around your neck makes you feel like you can't breathe, even though you're breathing fine. But it's the whole situation is a traumatic experience.
It is.
Whether it be the initial cause of the call, then a lot of our treatment. Again, like you said, there's so many people that surround you. The fire department, most of the time, responds with us. And a lot of times they'll get there first. Because we're all spaced out a little different within the city. And then, they're asking questions, and then we ask questions, and then we put you in the truck and there's more questions. And that comes along with, us getting vital signs or an EKG or, administering medications. And a lot of times it can be overwhelming. We try to explain what we're doing to the patients, and then even kind of getting them ready for the hospital. Because then when we get to the hospital, then there's more questions and more people. But all of that you all just said is just all normal responses I've heard over the years.
And it's amazing. Everybody's is different. I mean, we videotape our clients. We take statements of them so that we can try to get a better feeling and let them tell their story. And the ambulance part of it is always one. Every one of them is different. They've got some emotion that we can't. And so I do want to talk to you just briefly before we leave about your experience as the deputy coroner. Now, while we were off the recording, I think you told me you've been in that capacity or in that position for now about a year and a half. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you were telling me that it's been interesting for you to learn the side of where you normally leave off.
I mean, also, again, there's schooling that goes behind that, and a lot of legal things that you have to learn. But it's a different experience. Before, if I responded to a scene where someone had passed away, I get the information that I need. I hand it off to the coroner who arrived, and then we go and get ready for the next call. But now on this side of things, when I respond as our deputy coroner, there's a lot more investigative work that goes into it, because sometimes things aren't what they seem.
And I guess in that capacity, you have to work hand in hand with law enforcement, and because there has to be preservation of evidence, and
Yes,
there has to
yes.
and statements
everything.
taken,
Yes.
statements of people that were around. So that has to be different than what you're training as a paramedic, because now it's preservation and it's working to help document the cause of death and the timing of death and potential factors in the death. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, even as a paramedic, you do a lot of those things also, or an EMT. I mean, you're still trying to preserve things on scene, especially, if you walk in and you know right away, okay, this is something that's serious. This is something that, is become a legal issue. We are trained not to, be careful how you go in and out of the scene, how you preserve evidence that's on the patient or around the patient. So, I mean, they do go hand in hand. It's just a kind of an extended part of what I was already doing.
So does that mean what you do is almost a twofer, in the sense where, like, my grandfather passed away, all the paramedics knew is that, he was unresponsive. So when they got there, they said, oh, he's gone. And then we had to wait for the coroner to arrive. So with your position, if you arrive at a scene as a paramedic and it's like, oh, the person, it's not that they're unresponsive, it's that they've passed away, do you then immediately have to transition over into deputy coroner and then start that whole process so one becomes the next, or do you have to wait for someone else to get there and then start that process?
I wait for someone else. I don't respond to the same calls. Actually, I'm a deputy coroner in a different county, so I don't ever respond to the same calls that I work on the ambulance. But it would not be. I wouldn't work the same case. That's too close to one to the other. Conflict of interest. So, but it is the same though. Once we realize that the person has passed on, there's nothing that we can do medically. Then we preserve the scene as, until the coroner gets there, and then nothing else is touched.
One of the things that I think is important, I heard you use the word legal about 4 times in the conversation, this short conversation about the coroner, maybe once or twice in the entire discussion we had about paramedic. One of the things that I don't want to be distasteful as a personal injury lawyer. I take it very seriously, and I believe that there are times when we have to be involved to be able to assist people after the fact, to be compensated and to determine what they're entitled to for time off work, etc. One of the things that I try to educate the public on is that seeking legal advice as quickly as possible is important because of the preservation of evidence. Evidence rooms will only hold things for so long. There are marks and things on roadways. There are people that see it that all of a sudden disappear. And from the same reason that you guys have got to get there and start doing your work quickly, it is important for the preservation of evidence to proving these cases. And you're an integral part of that. But that interests me because have you in your year and a half had to speak with some lawyers about what you see and don't see, as a deputy coroner?
One so far, and I worked one recently that will probably turn into that. And so, we know that's always a possibility, whether it be paramedic or coroner, whether that be arriving on scene. Again, we try to do our best to preserve what we can. And then even in our documentation, right. Knowing that either that run form as a paramedic or that run form that I'm doing as a coroner will eventually trickle to a lawyer's office, and that is your documentation is like your word is your bond. That's kind of what that is. That, right. That's your summary of what happened, what you saw, what you found. Along with, on the coroner side, we do photographs.
Right.
We don't on the paramedic side.
My wife is a nurse, ER nurse for years. She's now doing more legal nurse consulting because I've asked her to make it a little less stressful. But one of the things, a part of her education, I know, was there was some medical legal part of the education. As a paramedic instructor, do you have part of your education being legal?
That's always covered. Now, whether that's a paramedic or an EMT, there is a legal portion of that curriculum that is given, and then they're even obviously quizzed on it. There's tests over it to make sure that you understand. Every run could be a legal situation, and it doesn't matter what kind of call you go to. You never know what's really going on.
One thing that PJ likes to always ask me is, like, did you have some crazy story? Like, he's like, what's one of the, when he and I travel some together and have to go out and do some things, and PJ's always wanting to hear war stories, either about courtrooms or going out to scenes of wrecks and things like that. Now, I know you have, HIPAA issues and things like that, but in general, just does some crazy story as a paramedic or as a deputy or a coroner just come to mind that you tell people, like when you're at family barbecues or whatever?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. I've been doing this so long. I mean, I think sometimes it's just crazy the things that we get called to. It's not always blood and guts and crazy stuff. It's a lot of times it's just simple things. I had a lady got her finger caught in an umbrella. It's just, sometimes it's just you're baffled at.
I'm assuming that was an easy fix.
Yes, but when we arrived, there was so much screaming that we thought, this is really bad. But she was in a predicament. To her, that was a true emergency. Her finger was, But, we go and we do, no matter what the call is.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the call is not what it ends up being. Like I said earlier, our dispatchers and our first responders, they really are the first true line of first responding. And, they take information and it trickles to us. So a lot of times what they get on the phone and give to us, then when we get there, it's totally not even what it was.
I bet.
So even though we think we're walking in prepared, sometimes we are just not.
Well, it's funny. Once you said that about some of the craziest stuff is what you get there and see that's not super life-threatening and that kind of thing, but just how did they get themselves in this predicament? It reminded me, and this was years ago, my daughter was probably 3, and she had one of those plastic play kitchens. You know what I'm talking about? They've got for little kids, and it's a plastic. Well, Lainey was like pretending to make muffins, with one of her little plastic muffin things, and she got it out. And I said, and I was being funny, and I said, did you get it all out of there? And I put my head in the oven of like little micro, like this plastic, and I turned at the same time. It kind of fell toward me, and I don't know how it vacuumed, or just it was the perfect turning of my head and the turning of that thing, and I got my head stuck in that play kitchen and could not get it out.
And now because of you, there's a warning tag on it. Do not put head in
I'm
oven.
serious. I was like pushing against it, and I was like, Lainey, and so I was like, go get mommy. And so she went and got her, and I was like, she was like, well, she was trying to get me out of it, and I could not get out of it because I was starting to panic and sweat. No, I'm not kidding. And I was like, you're gonna have to call 911. Somebody's gonna have to cut me out of this thing, And just as she was getting, at the time we may have had a cell phone, but she was walking into the kitchen to get the phone, and I either relaxed or I sweat enough to where there was enough, and it popped open, and it almost sounded like a, when my head came out of there. And can you imagine EMT showing up at my house and Daddy's head is in the oven? I mean, come on.
I can't, but I bet Dinah can.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I will say in that woman's defense who had pinched or got her finger stuck in the, I don't know if it was pinched or what, but I think at some point in all of our lives we have you pinch the webbing between your thumb and your index finger, and that is the worst.
It is.
It's very debilitating, and you think it's the end.
But to call an EMT,
right? I'm trying to slightly justify. Hey, I do have one really quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, PJ, before we close.
So the one thing, and this is something I've never asked you about before, but so the one thing that you always see in medical shows, the one constant is there's always an episode where they have to do an emergency tracheotomy. Have you had to do that?
It's not as common as they make it seem on TV. We have so many other tools in our bag to prevent that from happening. That type of procedure is like a last ditch effort. Like that, it's not as common. Don't even get me started on medical shows. I can't watch them sometimes because some of the things they do on there is not how it is in real life.
Oh,
Right.
Yeah. It's the same thing with legal stuff. It's like you can go from the beginning of a case to the trial in 30 minutes. I'm like, hey, and people want you to get them a result in a case, and you're like, it's going to take a year and a half to undo this.
Right.
It's crazy.
When they do the emergency tracheotomies in the shows, they'll have the knife they need to cut the slit, but then they never have like a tube, so they always have to improvise, and they'll use like the middle part of a ballpoint pen or like a straw and stick it in there, and I always think that cannot be sanitary.
It
and they would
sells.
probably get in trouble for that.
Yeah.
Yes.
That kind of stuff sells, PJ.
We are trained on how to do them, but again, there's a lot of stuff that we're trained on. The same thing with doctors and nurses, that we have all of these other things that we can use or do before we get to that.
Well, a heartfelt thanks, and the best to you as you continue to help the members of our community. We genuinely appreciate it, and we thank you for your time. This has been Done Lite, brought to you by Foreman Watson Holtry. Our special guest today, Dinah, with our local EMT service. Dinah Chapman is the Deputy Coroner and also teaches paramedics at OCTC, so we're very thankful for your time.
Thank y'all.
We will check back with you in a week with more Done Lite, brought to you by Foreman Watson Holtry, FWHlegal.com. It's been a great day, PJ.